But yeah, I mean, just the amount of growth with Plus R has just been just incredible, absolutely incredible. I've been shocked. So yeah, I think we got a fair amount of people on now. Might as well go ahead and get started. How's it going, everybody? I'm just, you know what? This is just a milestone. I didn't think I'd achieve any remotely close to time soon, but you guys made it happen. Thank you guys so much for just even watching. Even if you're just a follower or you're just a watcher, you know, it's just great getting people into this game, Plus R, and finding games in general. And you know, I do a lot of Plus R content right now, but I didn't used to always just do Plus R content. So yeah. Thanks, Kirby. I really appreciate it. It's just been a massive jump for me. Massive jump. Like I said, we had 6 subs 3 weeks ago. So they have been. Those tournament streams are amazing, and I can't wait to rewatch the 25-25 when I get a chance. That was so much fun to be a part of. I can't wait to see how things kind of go in the future with it. So yeah, we got a fair amount of people here. It's mostly going to be kind of a chatting night, right? I'm going to be kind of going over the history of me, you know, just the history of me with fighting games and with everything in general. Back when I started with Street Fighter 2. So let's start with that, right? So back in the day, when I was a wee little lad, I played Street Fighter 2, right? And you know, I kind of knew about the game. You could tell the game was out from, you know, arcades and TV, and it was out in like 7-Elevens and laundromats and everywhere, right? Everywhere. I didn't really get a chance to play it in the arcade, but what I did get a chance to do was play it on console. So I ended up playing it, you know, I didn't have a Super Nintendo. I had a regular Nintendo. But a friend of mine had a Super Nintendo, and I would always go to his place, and we would kind of play games over there. Really, my friend would have the Super Nintendo. We play games like Donkey Kong Country and stuff like that. But his teenage brother had a game called Street Fighter 2, and we'd heard about it a little bit. We've seen it around, and so I was like, hey, let's check this game out. And we both kind of had no idea what to do. We were just mashing like animals, right? Just mashing like stupid, crazy people. I eventually learned a little bit of how to play, but really all it was I knew how to mash buttons and do 100 hand slaps and kicks with Chun-Li and things like that. I liked characters that could do charge attacks because I knew how to do charges, and I kind of gravitated towards Chun-Li, I want to say. So, Street Fighter 2. This music, it's so nostalgic, right? Just hearing this music in this game just brings back so much memories. So like the freshness of what this was and what this game meant. And just, you know, we played brawlers, you played beat 'em ups, you know, you had Ninja Turtles, you had all that other kind of stuff. But look at this. This is something that was different, right? We hadn't played. This was something where you could kind of fight each other in, and you could play each other. And I had no clue what I was doing. I beat my friend's teenage brother by mashing like crazy, right? But I think eventually I gravitated towards Chun-Li back then, because she could jump off walls, she could do those moves that I kind of were able to do easily, charge attacks and mashing buttons and things like that. And she had the bouncing medium kick, so I used that a lot. But that was really all the extent I ever had with Street Fighter 2 back then. It completely changed the world of video games, Street Fighter 2. And what you see right here is Street Fighter 2 hyper fighting, but really, I mean, starting with World Warrior, it was just a phenomenon, an absolute phenomenon. So after Street Fighter 2, you know, I didn't, like I said, it was at a friend's house. We played it when we could. I didn't do too much of what it was. I did learn how to do Hadouken, but I could barely do it. I couldn't do quarter circle backwards, and I definitely couldn't do dragon punches. Dragon punches were like mind-blowing, right? But eventually, I kind of learned something else, and it wasn't Street Fighter 2, because again, I couldn't really play it much. We were just playing on console, and I didn't really get a chance to play in arcades. But there was one game I saw at a movie theater and it really kind of brought me into fighting games a little bit more. Let me show you what that is here. So this, hopefully this game needs no introduction. This is Samurai Shodown 2. Samurai Shodown 2 I saw at a movie theater, and on it, it was, you know, those cool red cabs, right? Look above, right? Those cool Neo Geo red cabs. And it had decals that showed the moves, how to actually play these characters. Which was something brand new to me. Like this, it shows me how to play these, right? And I would spend so much money and time after going to movies with my family, where we would go and I would just learn the game and learn how to play. I wouldn't be even playing anybody, I'd be playing the computer, and I'd be trying to do these moves that it said I could do in the side. Neo Geo was definitely something else, and back then, you know, even though I was only, say, probably 7 years old when I was getting into Samurai Shodown 2, I knew that this game was something special, right? This game, you can tell with the presentation. There's stages where there's no music. It's just the blowing of the wind. There's other stages where it's just like a single flute. You could slice the bamboo. This game is beautiful. It is an absolute masterpiece with its aesthetic. And just the gall of creating a game like that back then was something that I never thought was, like, looking back at it now, I'm surprised I even enjoyed it. Because it's so subtle and so simple, yet precise, right? This game is just boiled down to its essence, a solid fighting game. And back in the day, I actually was kind of into anime a little bit. Most of my friends weren't, but I had a Korean friend who was importing VHS tapes from other places, right? So I actually watched Ranma Half with him. That was my first anime when I was 7 years old. Probably confusing a 7-year-old boy at that time with an anime like Ranma Half, but that was when I first kind of broke the mold to try and learn fighting games, learn how to play fighting games, right? So after Samurai Shodown 2, after Samurai Shodown 2, there was a whole bunch of other fighting games. I started getting into them a lot more, just seeing them and kind of looking at them and all that kind of stuff. And eventually, there was a game that came out called Mortal Kombat. I've got right here a copy of, this is Mortal Kombat 2, not the original Mortal Kombat. But I could tell when I played Mortal Kombat, my older cousin had this game. I thought it was so cool because you could see all the blood and effects and things like that. And I could tell with Mortal Kombat that it was a little bit weird, right? Because I'd already learned special moves in Samurai Shodown 2. But Mortal Kombat had this weird stuff in it, right? You could mash punch over and over and just keep doing it. You had a block button. It had like this weird jump kick arc. It really didn't make sense to me, but I still kind of liked just the blood. And it was very different with its rotoscope kind of aesthetic, which I hadn't really seen before. That was kind of its definite appeal. So after Mortal Kombat 2, I actually got into a different fighting game, and this was the one that actually really set me forward towards every other fighting game. So like I said, I learned special moves in Samurai Shodown 2 just by fighting the computer. But then there was one game that actually changed how I thought about fighting games. Let me load that one up here. This was Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct. And this is what got me into fighting games. Street Fighter 2 was great. It kind of brought me into it. It kind of opened the gateway. Samurai Shodown 2 taught me how to like learn moves. This got me into fighting games. The music, the combos. I know the combos in this game are weird and wrong, but it came with a soundtrack, the Killer Cuts. I don't know if you guys remember that, if that was even your time, but this game, the important thing about this game wasn't that it was really even a good fighting game. It's not that great of a fighting game, but what was important was that I had a friend who also wanted to play this game and who wanted to beat me. We both had Super Nintendos, we both could practice, and we could both actually play this game against each other. That is what did it. Having a sparring partner is what got me into Killer Instinct. Having a sparring partner is what got me into fighting games. And that was the start of everything. We tried to learn how to play these games, we tried to learn to get better, we tried to really actually play these constantly. And Killer Instinct was definitely the start of everything. The presentation was really great in this game. I don't know what it is. Samurai Showdown 2 has amazing presentation, and Killer Instinct has amazing presentation too. However, eventually we moved on from Killer Instinct. We actually tried to beat each other. We actually tried to get good. I mained Saberwolf back then. But eventually we had the new generation, right? So this was kind of the end of Super Nintendo. But I ended up getting a Nintendo 64, and the friend of mine, who was my sparring partner, ended up getting a PlayStation. And those of you who know fighting games know that N64 did not have a great fighting game library. So I actually didn't get into Guilty Gear Missing Link. Spoilers ahead, I guess. But the first fighting game I played on PlayStation was my first 3D fighting game of all. And that was Battle Arena Toshinden. Battle Arena Toshinden is a little bit different than a lot of your other 3D fighting games. It's actually a lot faster, but it's still not great, right? It wasn't great. I didn't know any better, but we played the hell out of Battle Arena Toshinden. The problem was he had a PlayStation and I didn't. So it'd be me going over to his place, and we'd practice Battle Arena Toshinden probably after watching Mortal Kombat Annihilation, the movie, and eating pizza, and then playing Battle Arena Toshinden and all that kind of stuff. But Battle Arena Toshinden was it. And I kept renting other PlayStation games and kind of bringing them over to his place. We'd try them out. We tried Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. I was a huge Dragon Ball fan back in the day, but I had no clue what GT was. We played Street Fighter EX plus Alpha, which, a little quick side note here, since I was only a console player at the time, I didn't know anything about the arcade scene and what had been going on with Street Fighter. We knew Street Fighter 2, but then even like the newest and latest Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, didn't really come to Super Nintendo. Super Street Fighter 2 did, and that port was terrible. The one with the Tiak and Cam, that port was horrible. We didn't play that. Street Fighter Alpha came out for Super Nintendo, and that port was terrible. And then you didn't really see Street Fighter Alpha 2 or Alpha 3 in our realm of consoles, right? So we didn't really see a lot of that. So really, Street Fighter had gone to the wayside. We'd kind of forgotten about Street Fighter, and we saw Street Fighter EX, and we thought, this is the new Street Fighter EX series. It's 3D. It's amazing. So we kind of went a little bit on that, but that was kind of as far as we knew for Street Fighter. I did have a little bit of brief arcade experience, but mostly it was just like I'd go to my local skating rink, ice skate rink, and we had it had Primal Rage and they had Darkstalkers, original Darkstalkers. And I loved playing Darkstalkers. I thought it was so weird, and I thought that the cat girl was really hot, right? I was like, okay, this is kind of neat. Primal Rage was something wild. We hadn't seen that before. And so I played a little bit of those on the arcade, but I didn't really have a sparring partner to get into with them. I just kind of like chilling out at the ice skating rink. I didn't ice skate, but I really liked the cold, and it had those couple fighting games. So I kind of liked enjoying my time over there. Now that's the majority of my time in PlayStation 1. So PlayStation 1 back then didn't have a lot of good ports for fighting games. It had growing fighting games, but the ports were very different from the arcade. They weren't great. They had a lot of mistakes, a lot of loading time problems. So that's kind of my history of PlayStation 1. I didn't really get into Tekken back then. I played Ballerino Toshinden. I didn't really play Bloody Roar back then either. I did play Guys, yes, but that's a different story. After PlayStation, that is when the fighting game console era really started, because we had 2 new consoles that were the crux of all fighting. Like, this is what made console fighting game strong, and that's the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2. Those 2 games brought arcade experience to console. Before, like I said, you had these ports that weren't great at all, right? The Darkstalkers port for PlayStation, the Street Fighter Alpha ports for PlayStation, those were all crap. But Dreamcast had arcade-perfect versions of Capcom vs. SNK 2, of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Garo Mark of the Wolves. All these games were available on Dreamcast, and also PlayStation, that were just incredible, right? So 2 particular fighting games that I got into right away on PlayStation were these 2. So we have Soul Calibur 2. I didn't really get into Soul Calibur 1, but when Soul Calibur 2 came out, I was really into that. This is actually a little bit later in PlayStation 2's lifespan as far as for when I was playing PlayStation 2, but this game, Dead or Alive 2, I know Dead or Alive's kind of a meme, but Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore was such a good version, such a good game for me back then. I love Dead or Alive 2. I played the hell out of Dead or Alive 2. My friends played a lot of Soul Calibur 2, and we each had a console version of it. We each kind of swapped between it for Soul Calibur 2, but we played a lot of Soul Calibur 2. I have CVS 2 here as well. So, CVS 2. My friend, my sparring partner friend, Chris, was also a subscriber to PlayStation Magazine. In PlayStation Magazine, you see all sorts of other kind of games that are coming out, and when he was done reading them, he would kind of show it to me. And so I would be able to borrow his magazine and read it myself. And I remember reading a review for a game that was a little weird. It looked kind of like more of a cartoon style, an HD, not HD, they didn't have HD back then, a higher resolution sprite work that you can only really get on PlayStation 2. It's called Guilty Gear X. And I didn't really take much note of it. It was like, okay, that's neat. I couldn't find it anywhere. It was not on Blockbuster or anything like that. And, I get there. This is all console era for me, right? I still wasn't part of the arcade scene at this point. So I read about Guilty Gear X and kind of just brushed over it, right? We went over to Soul Calibur 2 and we had all this other stuff. And then I read PlayStation Magazine the year later, and they mentioned Guilty Gear XX. Okay, this game actually looks pretty neat. I know it's not a Blockbuster, some sort of weird import game, right? But why don't I buy it and try it out, see how it's like. So I have here. This is. I didn't get this at the time. A friend of mine had bought Guilty Gear X. I didn't play Guilty Gear X much at all. I did play on an arcade cab a little bit, but that was after I played Guilty Gear X2. This is my original copy of Guilty Gear X2, and this is what got me into Guilty Gear overall. I think, we all kind of know what's great about Guilty Gear, and what can draw a lot of people into Guilty Gear, and a big part of that is its presentation. Guilty Gear it's metal, right? It's metal. You don't have that aesthetic with any other fighting game. You had blood and guts, you had fantasy, you had regular, everyday people in everyday clothes fighting. But this futuristic metal style where you use weapons was really unique, especially for a 2D fighting game. You didn't have too many 2D fighting games where you used weapons. And I was really, really, really into X2. I was into the story mode. I was into the music. I was so into Guilty Gear at that time. I loved the game. Jam was my main character. I played Jam, and eventually we kind of as a group we'd come up with rules like what's allowed, what's not allowed, and we kind of felt that EX characters were legal in our own groups, because there's all these other fighting games that use EX characters. So I actually mained EX Biken. I mained Jam, but then when EX characters were allowed within our own group, I played a lot of EX Biken, and that was who I mainly played as. EX Biken didn't have any guard cancels. EX Biken just kind of felt like a very normalized character. She could do those guard cancels raw, so I could just do Sakura just on its own. And so that was kind of my main thing there too. I actually worked on a little bit of tournaments. We had some Smash Brothers Melee stuff I played in. We did a little bit of Soul Calibur 2 tournament thing that I joined. I didn't really have a good experience with those tournaments back then, until I kind of left high school and went over to college. And I immediately, when I was 18, moved out, went to Arizona from California. And at the college I went to in Arizona, it was called UAT. And what I realized was they had a fighting game group. It wasn't like a club or anything like that. It was a fighting game group. And to this day, Arizona still has a fighting game group at UAT. I still talk to a few of them from now on, every now and then. But I got a lot of them into Guilty Gear X2, and we played a lot of Guilty Gear X2. We eventually, when we were playing that, we played a lot of other stuff too. We were playing a little bit of Grow Marketable Wolves back then too. I actually played a lot of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 back in the day. I'm kind of skipping over that a little bit. But Marvel vs. Capcom 2 I really liked because it was really fast, very fast-paced. You could miss something with just a moment and just lose the whole match. And I kind of felt that a little bit with Guilty Gear X2. So I was kind of into that. But we eventually Guilty Gear X Sharp Reload came out on Xbox. And me, since I'd played on console my whole life at this point, barely touching arcades, I was a pad player. So when Sharp Reload came out, it came out on the Xbox. And I, like any rational person, can't play a fighting game on an Xbox controller. So our whole group, our whole community skipped it. We all played pad, so none of us played Sharp Reload. As far as we knew, the only difference was that they changed how Robokai played. Robokai was already in X2 as kind of a secret character, and now he plays different. So we didn't touch Sharp Reload. We didn't touch Sharp Reload at all. we felt like it wasn't even a different game at all. You know, it was just a game where you had different Robokai. Okay, whatever, that's the Xbox version. We'll play the PlayStation 2 version. But what did eventually come out, because we were waiting for the new version of Guilty Gear, what eventually came out is the new version of Guilty Gear. And that new version was glorious. That new version was Guilty Gear Isuka. Guilty Gear Isuka. And we played the hell out of this game. We loved it. I loved the turn button. I felt like it was an extra thing that you could add to the game. The 4-player Guilty Gear. It's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. But yeah, so we played a lot of Guilty Gear Isuka. There was actually an arcade nearby. I still went to arcades for games like racing games and for stuff like DDR. I played those a lot. But I didn't really play fighting games too much in arcades. But there was an Isuka cabinet at our local arcade, so I played that a little bit. Played a little bit of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, a little bit of Primal Rage in arcades, but again, not too much in arcades. Not yet, at least. Eventually, when I was done with college over there, I moved back to California, and I got myself a job at a place called Interface. Interface was an arcade back where I lived. And so I kind of I stuck with Interface. We had they had a few arcade cabinets. They had Guilty Gear X, they had King of Fighters 2003, and they had a game called Street Fighter 3. And I didn't know that they made a Street Fighter 3. Again, me being a console player, I'd heard a little bit about Street Fighter 0. I thought it was, but I mean, you know, can't really get into Street Fighter. I didn't even hear that Street Fighter 3 existed. Why did I pick Biken? So when I first checked all the characters next to, I liked Jam the most. I mostly because I was used to playing Chun-Li kind of characters with kicks, and stuff like that, and I knew that Jam had kicking ability, so I kind of focused a little bit more on Jam. When we expanded into EX characters, I liked how EX Biken played. I actually tried every single version of all of them, EX Eddie, EX Axel, and we kind of expanded through a whole list, and I felt like EX Biken was definitely my play style that I really liked to play. which is going to be a problem in the future when I get going to this. But EX Biken was my main character. So when I got back there, we, I got a little bit more into those fighting games. I heard about King of Fighters 2003. I played that. I hadn't really played a King of Fighters game before that. But there was some cool stuff in 2003. Some neat characters. I thought it was kind of neat. I felt like maybe I'll get into this game at some point. It was actually, at that time, it was Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. It wasn't even New Generation. I had completely missed all of Street Fighter 3. I didn't know any of it existed. Because it was all arcade, and it wasn't advertised. I mean, if you look at the sales for Street Fighter 3 in general, like as a whole, is one of the worst selling Street Fighters of all time. And I think that's all because of advertising. You go to a cabinet and you see this game that doesn't look like Street Fighter. At the top on the decal, it just says 3. You don't know what it is. You're just gonna walk past it. What were they thinking with the advertisement for Street Fighter 3? I don't know. But Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, definitely a great game. Just I didn't get into it at the time when it was out. So beyond that, I worked at Interface, right? And at Interface, I met a fighting game player named Arliath. Arliath was actually the manager at Interface. So I don't know if you guys know who Arliath is. He's a Street Fighter Vega player or Claw player. But I met him there, and he used to run a tournament called West Toast, where he'd run it about twice a year kind of thing, and it had mostly Melty Blood in it. I hadn't heard of Melty Blood at all, and he showed me Melty Blood. I loved Melty Blood. I got into it. I played more of Melty Blood, and I kind of really got into that game. And before things continued, I'd heard that they were making a new Guilty Gear, because I always checked that kind of stuff out. And that new Guilty Gear was called Guilty Gear XX Accent Core, and it was coming out for consoles. I knew about this coming out in 2007, and I was so freaking hyped for this game. I'd gotten back to California. All my friends were gone. I didn't know anybody. And Guilty Gear XX Accent Core was coming out. I got this game. I played it. I tried getting into it with people. And really, nobody played it. Nobody. I couldn't find any friends who were interested in it. Nobody was interested in this game at all. And it was really hard to try and get people into it. But I heard that there was a nearby arcade down in LA where I was living in Simi Valley at the time, which is just kind of over a mountain into San Fernando Valley, which is the furthest west point of LA. And I'd heard about an arcade in LA that actually had an Accent Core cabinet called Family Fun Arcade. Now, Interface, the arcade I worked at, was actually owned by the same owner as Family Fun Arcade. So I actually got a chance to meet the owner and kind of work with him a little bit. And ended up kind of, I worked a couple shifts over at FFA every now and then. And they had Guilty Gear X6 Accent Core. I was like, oh, this is great. I want to start getting tournaments back up. I'd worked with a little bit of tournaments back in Soul Calibur 2, and just some brief tournaments back in Guilty Gear X2. And so I wanted to kind of get into that. So I went to the arcade. I went to go find people. I was like, this game's new. It's brand new. Of course people are going to want to play this. And nobody was interested in it. They still weren't interested in Accent Core. They still weren't interested in it in the arcade. And what I learned was Accent Core was big. It was really big a year and a half ago when it came out in arcade, and now nobody wants to play it anymore. The game had just came out one day ago, and I learned that I'd already missed the entire scene. I missed the entire scene. It was all gone. So I was like, what is this? I, being a console player, had been stuck in the past every single time, right? I learned that all the games I was getting, all the games I was playing, were in the past. I'd been a year, 2 years behind everything because I've been playing it on console. When I played Street Fighter 2 Turbo, I was behind. When I was playing all this other stuff, I was behind. So I decided, you know what? Screw this. I'm getting into the arcade scene. And the biggest hurdle for me going into the arcade scene was switching from pad to joystick, because I had to. Nowadays you can choose with all the console stuff, but I had to choose joystick because it's the only way to play. I had 15 years of pad experience, and I had to get rid of all of that and learn how to play with a joystick. And so that was a big hurdle for me, but I eventually overcame it. I learned of all these other fighting games. There was a big scene at FFA for Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. I played a lot of Third Strike. I worked at the arcade 5 days a week now, full time, and I was learning how to repair arcade machines, learning how to arcade all these boards. I was managing the arcade a lot more at that point, and eventually started running West Toast. West Toast is was a series where we would run Guilty Gear and Melty Blood, and a little bit of Twinkle Star Sprites, and we would be doing that whole thing. I kind of took it over from Marliath at that point. I started running tournaments for Axon Core. I started building that scene because I couldn't just have this game that I loved and not have a scene for it. Come on. So we actually did that. I met a lot of good people that are now some close friends of mine. I met Jason D, Tronzilla, Raptor, Bang, Bad Example, DQRF, Slash Gordon, who back then was known as Real Bobman. I met all those guys back then. We used to run weekly tournaments for Guilty Gear XX Axon Core. And again, I found out I'd missed this whole community. This whole community of players, like, to me this was day one. To them this was day 1 year and a half, right? So I get in there and it's like, oh, who's this guy? Mike Z. He's just wrecking everybody because he's been playing this game for so long on the arcades. I'd missed Sharp Reload, I'd missed Slash. I missed 1.5 years of Axon Core. So when we'd run these tournaments, you know, we all kind of got to know each other a little bit better. We called them the Mike Z Donation Fund because he would always win. And it was a blast. It was a blast. We also kind of learned, we knew kind of as a group, good thing I missed Slash, I know. We kind of learned as a group that the franchise, the Guilty Gear franchise, was owned by Sammy. So if you look at these old ones here, this is Guilty Gear X. Guilty Gear X says Sammy at the bottom there. Sammy is a subsidiary of Sega, and Sammy owned the rights to the franchise of Guilty Gear. At least everything after Missing Link. So we kind of who is he? Sammy is a subsidiary of Sega, so it's a company. So we kind of knew after Axon Core, that was it. Guilty Gear was done. There's not going to be any more Guilty Gears. That's it. That's it. No more Guilty Gears. And we kind of knew this, and we accepted it, and that was it. We're going to move on to other games. But then we'd heard about a new franchise that was starting. Now, this was, again, 2007 was when I got into Axon Core, and that was because it came out in console. But we were about to hit a very, very important year for fighting games. Before I do that, let me switch this game out real quick from Killer Instinct. Let me know if you recognize this game. We were about to hit a very important year in fighting games, and that year was 2008. 2008. Now, those of you who were console players would think of it as 2009. In fact, there was a term called 09ers. So they were called 09ers, and they were kind of, you know, new players that we all kind of like didn't like that much. I kind of didn't care about them, but there were three games in particular that came out in 2008. 3 games in particular. Got them right here. So 3 games in particular. Tekken 6, which came out in 2008. We have Street Fighter 4, which came out in 2008. We have... I don't have a copy of Tekken 6, but we have Street Fighter 4, which came out in 2008. Not the console version. We have Blaze Blue, which came out in 2008. Right at the end, in November, was when Blaze Blue came out. And I know I said there was 3 games. There was a 4th one, and that was King of Fighters 12. I know King of Fighters 12, kind of a meme, right? Nobody likes King of Fighters 12, right? Ugh. Gross. King of Fighters 12. I know. But the graphics were identical to King of Fighters 13. The graphics for King of Fighters 12 and the graphics for BlazBlue were a new kind of era when it came to fighting games in general. Street Fighter 4's graphics were crap, but the game was popular because it kind of reminded people of Street Fighter 2. And again, to most people, they hadn't even heard of Street Fighter 3. They hadn't even heard of Street Fighter 0, right? Or Street Fighter Alpha. They knew Street Fighter 2, and they made the jump from 2 to 4. And it's like, oh, 2 was good. I remember 2. And so, BlazBlue, this one in particular, this is something else. So, we knew that Guilty Gear wasn't going to be around. We knew that they kind of lost everything from Guilty Gear. They weren't going to continue. BlazBlue was the spiritual successor to Guilty Gear, as far as we understood it. They had new kind of characters. It was a 2D weapon-based fighting game. Sprites looked really nice. It still had Roman cancels. It had a burst mechanic. The music was made by Daisuke Ishwatari. I mean, come on, this is the spiritual successor to Guilty Gear right here. We were all hyped for BlazBlue. I remember when BlazBlue came out, FFA, the arcade I worked at, was the only arcade in North America that got it day one. We got it right at the beginning, and we got it on Friday, and then the other places would get it because it was shipped. It would be shipped over the weekend. They'd get it on Monday. So we had it there, and I remember that one weekend, I spent $75 just putting in quarters playing BlazBlue. I loved BlazBlue. So into this game, and there were secret codes later on where you would unlock Hakumen and you'd unlock New. So there was that. I used to work at Family Fun Arcade. We were one of the biggest Third Strike scenes in North America. We had some of the best Marvel vs. Capcom 2 players in the world at that time. We would run qualifiers for Third Strike to send people over to SBO. FFA was my life. That's where I learned arcade tech, arcade repair, all sorts of things about arcade boards. And that was where that really got me into arcades. Ralph, who was the owner, is a good friend of mine still at this point. We go out to dinner every now and then. I'll take him to LAX if he's on like a trip or something like that. So yeah, we know each other very well. But eventually, this whole thing was running well. We had new versions of Street Fighter 4 that would come out. We had new BlazBlue versions that were coming out. I was running West Toast, which had, at that time, we were doing BlazBlue, Guilty Gear, Melty Blood, and Vampire Savior. And then we do Twinkle Star Sprites on the side. I loved that Twinkle Star Sprites League. It would be like $1 to enter this Twinkle Star Sprites tournament. It was a lot of fun. But eventually, in 2012, the arcade had to close down. So in 2012, we'd had a good run, and the rent was going to be increased to almost double. We just couldn't possibly afford it. We had to close everything down. We had a great party at the end. We had like 250 people enter the arcade when, the limit was 100 kind of thing. We just had an absolute blast. Ralph gave a great speech. Everybody kind of saying goodbye. I wish I could find it on YouTube. I tried looking, but I couldn't find it earlier. But he called all of us chess masters. He said, I don't really understand fighting games, but I know you guys love them, and we can tell what's going on with everything. I'm going to follow what's my heart is with you guys, and I know you're all chess masters. A lot of people don't see that. Really great speech by Ralph. We closed down. We closed down at the end of the year, 2012. Ralph did own one more arcade called Japan Arcade. We moved a lot of stuff over to Japan Arcade at that time. We still had a good chunk. Like, Japan Arcade was definitely a solid arcade. It was a smaller place, kind of a hole in the wall over in Little Tokyo. But we had just kind of the best picks of everything we could possibly have from his warehouse. Because you didn't have to split it between arcades. So we had, like, the best Beatmania, we had the best, like, all the best fighting games, the best version of DDR, all that kind of stuff was all at Japan Arcade. And eventually he had to close down Japan Arcade 2. Eventually he had to close down Japan Arcade 2 at the end of 2013. It was just going to be a little bit too much. They had Initial D 5, which was the newest version at the time. I played a ton of Initial D. I was so into Initial D. I held Initial D tournaments at FFA also. Loved Initial D. But yeah, so eventually we had to close down Japan Arcade in 2013, so only one more year later. And that was it. That was it. That was his last arcade. I still kind of worked with him for a little while throughout 2013 to 2014, kind of selling off a lot of his stuff, doing some final repairs so we can sell it. I worked freelance a little bit, repairing a few arcade cabs for friends and a few kind of celebrities and things like that. But at that point, it was done. I had a couple job offers from other arcades, but I decided that, you know, I wanted something a little bit more stable. As much as I loved arcades and it was kind of a big passion of mine, I just wanted something where I know I could have another job within another 5 years, you know, and I knew arcades were done. So it took me about a year to find a new job, and it was kind of really depressing the whole time. I'd taken complete hiatus from fighting games. I was in a kind of a bad spot at that point. We'd completely stopped fighting game stuff, and I was just kind of just looking for a job and just stuck at home kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. It took me almost a year to find a new job. I was applying everywhere and just wasn't getting anything. And eventually I did find a new job. And then after that job, I was able to move, got a good place. I kind of wanted to bring back fighting game stuff. I wanted to host casuals at my place. And that's what I wanted to do eventually, but we had to get everything set up first. So in 2015, I got a new place, and by 2016, I decided to go out and kind of look for some of those old scenes that we had. What I didn't realize was I missed something very important, and that thing that was important was the year 2014. So, 2014 had a game come out, a game called Guilty Gear Xrd Sign. And I'd known about Guilty Gear Xrd. We'd seen trailers and stuff where we were all excited for it before the arcades closed. But also, Plus R had come out around the same time. So there was, I think, like a 9-month gap between Plus R and Xrd Sign, at least from the PS3 version. So I had DQRF had invited me over to like a casual place, and we kind of played a little bit over there. But my heart wasn't in it at the time. I was done with fighting games. I was kind of not in a good spot. And then eventually in 2015, after I got my new place, kind of started early 2016, I decided to go out and look for some places. I'd found out that there was a group of people that were playing Plus R. There was a scene that played Skullgirls, Plus R, and Vampire Savior. And I got into there. And there was, you know, like maybe 8 people, maybe 10 people who'd play Plus R. And I started joining that and kind of playing, and I'd realized that Biken was completely different. Completely different. I loved EX Biken, and then when we were at FFA and we were running tournaments for Accent Core, I realized I can't play EX characters. It's just not going to be a thing. So I'd switch to regular Accent Core Biken, which plays completely different. So I'd relearn the entire game all over again with Accent Core. And I did. It was an uphill battle, but I did. And now that Plus R was out, Biken was now, again, completely different. So I had another completely uphill battle to learn Plus R Biken. Biken was, she changed so much that you actually saw a lot of other Accent Core players who switched to Biken, or who had been switched to Plus R, kind of quit Plus R because Biken was so different. So I had to unlearn everything and then restart everything from scratch. It was not a fun experience for me to learn Biken again, but I did. I got into it, I started playing more of these tournaments, I started getting a little bit more enthused, meeting more people. And then in 2017, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to the majors. I hadn't been to majors in a while. I'm going to go back to majors. And before I get into that, let me switch this game out. This music's annoying me. So I went to majors finally. Over in 2017, I went to EVO, and that was where I entered my first major for Plus R. And I was excited. I was really excited. Met a lot of people there. We did terrible, but we played, you know. And I met Shinobi there. Shinobi was running it. At that time, Shinobi had been a big player in Guilty Gear, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. Not for Guilty Gear. You could tell he was there just to kind of as an obligation to run Guilty Gear tournament, but he didn't really want to. You could tell. We had some great moments. We saw Skeletal Minion there win the tournament with some of the best play for Guilty Gear I've ever seen at that time, and it got me really enthused. I saw what Plus R could be with these majors, and I also saw that again, Shinobi was kind of doing it out of obligation, like he felt he had to because nobody else was going to do it, and it would be a shame if Guilty Gear wasn't up. I had a lot of tournament experience, so I decided, you know what, I'm going to run this next year. I'll take it off Shinobi's back. Shinobi can focus on what he wants to do, which is at that time going to be Under Night In-Birth. That's what he moved on to. Shinobi actually founded the whole the Under Night In-Birth scene over in, what was it, Georgia? What's that major called? I can't believe I can't remember it, but it was the Under Night In-Birth one. He read, you know, that and Melty Blood over there. They had some really good majors, and we're still going, but they you know, I had to cancel because of COVID at this point. Climax of Night, thank you, Climax of Night. They held 2 Climax of Nights over there. Shinobi ran that, so really amazing TO. A lot of love to Shinobi. I ended up taking over for 2018 for Evo. I'd also taken over the tournaments at my locals. I'd been really good at tournaments before then because I'd already run West Coast, and I was running West Coast for years at that point. So I was already really good at running tournaments. And so 2018, I decided to take over for Evo. I'd run Plus R side tournament at Anime Ascension earlier that year, and I met so many people I didn't know existed. I'd never heard of people, right? There's a player in Colorado, there were players in Florida, there were players in New York, there were players in Chicago, and they all went to Evo to kind of play. And I was like, you know what? SoCal has this scene of 8, 10, 12. At that point, we're getting closer to 20 people because I was building it locally. I was like, why should I just stop at SoCal? Why can't I start building this everywhere else? You know, Florida has some really amazing players. They've got M-Song, Rio, Oreo Speedwagon. They've got Skeletal Minion, who moved to Georgia at the time. I didn't know that, but they had so many great players. NorCal had great players. Chicago had great players. All of these places had it. Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. First SoCal, then the world. So I was like, you know, this is just, I can't let this happen. Much like how there wasn't a scene for Accent Core when I went to the arcade. There wasn't a scene for Plus R, and I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't stand by and see no scene for this game that I loved. Quick aside too, because I kind of skipped a little bit over the arcade stuff, but back when I was in the arcade, I learned a lot more about fighting games and all these old fighting games that I'd missed, especially the SNK ones. So I went back and I actually took the opportunity to play every single fighting game that was out at the time. Every single one. From the computer dojins to the ones that came out before Street Fighter 2. So I'd gotten into, you know, Melty Blood and Under Night, of course. Samurai Showdown, H&K, CVS2, Third Strike, and I was actually running not tournaments, but I was running those on the side for my channel back in the day. If you look at my YouTube channel, you can see a lot of old stuff for CVS2 and for Third Strike that we'd run. But I mean, I was getting into all sorts of other stuff. I learned stuff from Street Fighter 1. I learned about Rumblefish 2 to Hollow Coliseum, Neo Geo Coliseum, Battle Coliseum, Battle K Road, Daraku Tenshi, The Fallen Angels, Rage of the Dragons, Big Bang Beat, First Impression, like I said, Dojin fighting games, World Heroes Perfect, Aggressors of Dark Combat, Savage Rain, Fu and Tag Battle, all that stuff. I was learning all of it and playing all of it and trying to learn how to play those games. So that is what really got me into the expansion of fighting games that I'm in now, where I now know all of them, or knew all of them from back then. There's a few of them that I don't know nowadays, but they're mostly indie kind of fighting games. But that was it for me. I trained to learn everything I could about fighting games, and I love all of them. I've been playing so many of them. Some are better than others, of course. Quick aside, I had a birthday in, what year was it? I think it was in my 2018 birthday. The people from SoCal got together to get me something. They got me an arcade board because they knew I collected arcade boards. And they got me a game that also came out in 2008. Which was, you know, like I said, the big year for fighting games. And this game was Sengoku Basara Cross. I still have Sengoku Basara Cross. I've got the arcade board. I don't play it, but I've got it. I opened it up in the box like, oh, thanks. You guys spend a lot of money on this for me. Thank you. I don't know how many times I've played it, but I have it. But yeah, so I didn't want to just promote Plus R. I wanted to do every kind of fighting game, right? I love all these different fighting games. I especially want to promote the really high quality fighting games. I have, like you can see on my channel, I have a lot of CVS2 stuff, a lot of Third Strike stuff. Vampire Savior's a great game, a lot of that kind of stuff. I love those kind of games. They're really great, really well made games. And nowadays you see kind of problems that you don't see with those games. Like with Street Fighter V, there's certain problems I don't like as much. Not to harp on some of these newer fighting games. There's some newer fighting games I love. I love Samurai Showdown 7. That game's great. I absolutely love Samurai Showdown 7. I love Under Night In-Birth. That game was trash when it came out, but it's really, really improved drastically. I love Under Night In-Birth. But yeah, so eventually I was like, I can't just let SoCal be the only place. So I worked on getting into the Discord. The Discord at the time I think had maybe 500 or 700 members, really small group of people. It actually, the Plus R Discord started off as a Plus R speedrunning Discord server. I know, a speedrunning fighting game Discord server. That's how it started off. I was like, okay, hold on, let me do what I can. And I became an admin in the Plus R Discord, and I worked to get everybody else the kind of gameplay that we'd seen at my place, at everybody else. Go to speedrun.com. You'll see Hano on there in first place. But yeah, Sunny was the main mod over there. Ashley, who is over there as well, is another mod. She actually is the server owner for the channel. Slothfax is her handle. But yeah, they kind of let me in, let me be admin, and I kind of took over the place, but more of trying to really improve things around. And I'd gotten really the scene to connect in a way I don't think they had been before. We all kind of loved this game, but we didn't really talk to each other much. And after 2018, I was like, I can't let that stand. So 2019 was my really big push. 2019, I think I got a lot of North America to kind of work together and kind of group together. I went to 5 different majors that year. We had Frosty Faustings. I didn't do much at Frosty Faustings. I kind of did a little bit of a side tournament there, but that was it. I ran Anime Ascension again, which I had done before. I had ran Anime Evo, which was a really big success for that year. We actually ran a Missing Link tournament as well at Anime Evo, and that was a lot of fun. I went over to Combo Breaker. Combo Breaker had never had Plus R as a side tournament ever in its life. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and go to Combo Breaker and run Plus R at Combo Breaker. And we had a lot of fun there. That was the first time I'd ever made top 8 at a major. And then CE Otaku was kind of the final one for that year. CE Otaku was a really well done tournament. I had a blast there at CE Otaku. They did a great job. And we had 3 different kumites and a team tournament. I kind of worked my ass off for that. I was so exhausted, but I think everybody really loved it. And those kumites we had at CE Otaku are some of my most viewed. The kumites are the ones where you have one player and you sit them down and you just have people fight against them 3 out of 5 for as long as you can find people. And then we recorded that and we uploaded it. So you can see the Mahoko one, you can see the Skeletal Minion one, the Digital Watches ones. Those were all from CE Otaku. And we also went and had some great dinner together. I go to a bar, have some drinks. Connecting the scene in that way was something that was a lot more important to me. And I had CE Otaku's kind of like the last big moment that I won't ever forget. We did go to Frosty Faustings next year, so that was actually this January in 2020. And Elven Shadow runs a great tournament. I wish I'd known about the Sunday, because there is like a Sunday you can pay for, but there's no tournament going on. I was like, well, if there's no tournament, why am I going to stay? But then I quickly realized you don't stay just for the tournament. You stay to play with everybody and go out and have a beer with them and all that kind of stuff, So 2020, I felt like I missed out on that Sunday. and Anime Ascension was in February, so I ran Anime Ascension. We had the biggest Plus R tournament we'd ever had at Anime Ascension. Really great showing there. A lot of fun. I loved it, and had an absolute blast there at Anime Ascension. And we were getting ready to. I'd been speaking with the Hado, the guy who runs. He runs Combo Breaker, and we were going to make a much bigger event for Plus R over there with what they were doing. They were actually going to be promoting all sorts of other great side tournaments at Combo Breaker this year. It was going to be great. But we all know what happened. COVID happened. I'd actually just moved with DQRF to this new place that I'm at right now. We just moved the week before the lockdowns happened here in LA. So we kind of just missed it. We were able to kind of lock down over here. Of course, all locals stopped. All locals. We are actually doing 2 to 3 meetups a week for Plus R. But, you know, we weren't really hampered by it. We knew, okay, it's going to come back eventually. We can go back and do stuff eventually. I set up my studio here. I got this green screen behind us. I've got a couch with more fighting game stuff, and you can kind of flip the camera around either way. We've been inviting people over for all sorts of stuff here too. We've been doing casuals here where we'll have like an exhibition, and where we invite 2 people over, and we all are always wearing masks and stuff like that. We'll do that every now and then. And we'd kind of learned about GGPO being available through the MIT license. We had a little bit of the group who were running a mod for it, kind of working on that, but they didn't really get anywhere with it. It was kind of going down the drain, and in April it kind of felt like they'd really stopped. They weren't doing any sort of progress on GGPO. Lolowin had injured his wrist, and they really couldn't do much at all. Around that time, I'd gotten a message from them, and I wasn't able to share it, but I signed an NDA, which I can talk a little bit about now, and I was able to kind of test a little bit of GGPO back in the day, so I knew it was coming. I couldn't say a word about it, and it was just eating me alive. It was eating me alive. I couldn't say a single word about it. But I was helping test it out because they needed people from other areas to test out, so that's what I was doing. So I knew, and because of that, I wasn't despairing that, you know, our locals were done, because I knew something was going to come up. And eventually it did. And I mean, this has been just the biggest explosion of I would say any revival of any fighting game in history. We had a peak of 2,330 players, which beat Xrd by 1,000 players. We beat Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. We beat Under Night In-Birth. We almost tied, I think, with Dragon Ball FighterZ for the maximum. Like just, it's insane how much we've been going with this game. And my whole stream, everything's been completely exploded. I've been streaming and running videos for years. Like, we're talking 4 years at least, and I've got YouTube footage from 5 years ago and 6 years ago of me doing footage, and I'd never really taken off. At most, before GGPO was announced, I had 6 subscribers, but you know, all of it I kind of felt was practice for me to get good at commentary, for me to get good at the game, to do scene building, and just to kind of learn all sorts of other fighting games and kind of better the way my stream looks, right? So so I've had a lot of evolutions of how my stream looks over the years, and I've been able to improve it quite a lot at this point. And now, here we are. I had 6 subscribers 3 weeks ago. Only 3 weeks ago, I had 6 subscribers. And now you guys helped me get this to 100 subscribers. I was able to apply for Twitch partnership the other day, and we'll see how that goes. This could be something much greater. And for those of you who kind of know me, you know that I don't quit. I'm never satisfied, ever. So where we're at right now, to me, this always feels like this is the start. This is the start of where things are going. Us getting 204 entrants on that first Sunday for GGPO was the largest Plus R tournament in the entire game's history around the world. The largest tournament ever. 204 entrants. And then the next week later, 465 people in. We'd over doubled the world record at that point. That's how I saw it. And this is something that's going to continue. I understand that there's hype, and then the hype kind of tapers off. But after it tapers off, that's when you start climbing up. And that's where we're going to be. And I'm not going to go too much into the future that I've planned, but I always plan ahead. And I would say practice plus R, because there's stuff coming up. There's stuff coming up, and if you want to be a part of that, if you want to kind of get more stuff plus R, then practice. And it doesn't matter if you're a new player or an old player, a veteran who stopped with Accent Core, or you've been playing plus R since plus R's been going on. Practice, because there's stuff coming up. There's some serious stuff coming up. And I am so excited for the future. And now that you know my history, it's not just plus R, right? I've been playing all these other fighting games this whole time, and my handle isn't classic Guilty Gear player, it's classic fighting game player. I love these old games, I love plus R, but I love all of these old games, and I want to see them kind of get their rightful place in where they're supposed to be. I see them as, like Ralph said, we're all chess masters. Chess masters who are kind of not well understood. Even among other kind of esports genres, fighting game players are really, it's just a one and done thing. You know, how can you be a team in a fighting game player? It's kind of a little bit of the odd man out. And I don't want to just promote plus R. I will. It's definitely my favorite fighting game. But I want to see where we can keep going. I want to see where Super Turbo can go. I want to see where CVS 2 can go. I want to see where Third Strike can go. And I'd like to see if we can kind of get this momentum, not just for plus R, but for other games as well. And I know that that Saban had recently done a Matcherino Cup for Super Turbo, and that Matcherino Cup raised thousands of dollars for Super Turbo. You know, you can have a Super Turbo Grandmaster. There was a tournament, Battle of the Strongest 3, that raised over $10,000 for Marvel vs. Capcom 2. We recently, over these past 3 weekends, we raised over $6,000 for plus R. This is where things are going. This is where things are going. And we'll see how things kind of continue through 2021. But I think the progress that I made between 2018 to 2019 was a really big step. And that's how I like to do things. Really big steps. So we're in 2020 now, and we'll see how things go for 2021. But all I can say for that is practice plus R. Practice. Excited to see how things go.